Hey, Lucy,
Hello.
you asleep then?
It's none of your business.
Just meditating. Hi, Lucy McRae. Great to see you again. Welcome to today's collaboration with you, artist, filmmaker, space traveler, body architect. Tell us, first of all, where are you? Where are you in the world?
I am in downtown Los Angeles. It's 10 a.m. and I am in my unair conditioned studio that we have not been in for many months. So it sort of feels quite abandoned.
And tell us a little bit about yourself. Who are you and what do you do?
um, I'm an artist. I feel like I'm an interpreter of the fringes of culture, and by tuning in to what I feel is going on, I turn that into films, installations, photographs, and artworks that prepare the body for the future.
And you have a very close relationship with the design world, don't you? You even worked for Philips Design in the Netherlands for a while. So tell us, how did you manage to sort of bridge these two different worlds? And then I suppose the third world is of that you were a classical dancer for a while, or that's what you studied. So how did you get these different worlds to come together?
It was definitely probably not conscious. It was very much like a dance between putting myself in situations that I was completely unexperienced and unqualified for, but just with a curiosity of like being diverse. So Philips was 4 years working at a wearable tech lab, developing things like electronic tattoos, dresses that blushed with light, and I very much brought my classical ballet background. I trained in French Cicchetti for 14 years and would roll around on the floor at Philips and sort of use the momentum of the body to speak about how technology and the body interface. And that was really where I learned throwing an artistic lens on technology, and then from there moved to Amsterdam and set up my art studio.
And you said just now that your work involves preparing the human body for the future. Tell us a little bit about that. Why is that the thing that you've settled on, and how do you explore that area?
I don't think I've settled on it. I think that's kind of when we were at Philips, and what I do now is pick up on weak signals and then turn those into speculations of where I think the future is going. And my work comes from making. It's really intuitive and primal. And through filmmaking, I started making these very sort of weird second skins that were moving around the body. And then I started turning those with you for a commission in 2014, turning those installations into public experiences. And then what happens, whether it's an epiphany or ideas are in the ether, they just keep tipping into science and health and the body. And through storytelling, considering how will we prepare ourselves for the future when things are unprecedented, changing so quickly, and how can the art and design world be part of that conversation and act.
And how much of your work is triggered by the reality of your situation, like in lockdown because of coronavirus, or worrying about environmental destruction, or reading about Elon Musk's latest mission to Mars or whatever? How much of it is personal to your own hopes and fears?
I think that I wrote to you recently and said that I use my body as a kind of tuning instrument. So it's strange how it happens, and I feel that it's through conversations and the people that I meet, and by constantly putting myself in situations that are uncomfortable. And I think there is where you're kind of on this precipice of like progress and innovation, because I'm the outsider and I'm not the expert, but I'm interested and curious.
And that is quite an unusual approach for the kind of the arts and design and architecture worlds, because the work is usually so depersonalized. I suppose more in performance, in dance, then the body becomes the vehicle for expression. But do you feel yourselves a bit of an outlier in the world of people who make things, that express things through objects rather than through their own emotions?
I think that, I mean, I definitely relate to the outlier anomaly experience. And once you've been in a situation afterwards, you can appreciate being in it. But when you're in it, sometimes it's quite awkward and uncomfortable. I think that my process of making is very much about emotion and feeling and, you know, responding to how I am. But then the output is perhaps, I don't want to say void of emotion, but it then becomes a physical manifestation of that creative process. And when I start and when I end, you can marry up the sketch with the object or the sculpture, but you really don't know what you're going to get.
You mean you don't know what you're going to get, or the audience doesn't know what they're going to get?
Everyone doesn't know what they're going to get. Which makes it hard, you know, but also I believe that, you know, in terms of like generating new aesthetics or building new worlds, if you know what you're going to get, then how can it be fresh or something that you haven't made before? So, you know, like many people, I'm interested in making things that I've never done before.
And often in your work, or maybe possibly always, that there's the human person, which might be you, or it might be an actor or a dancer, and then there is an object, or there's an architectural space or an interior of some sort. So what comes first, the needs of the occupant, or the contraption? How do you approach these? How do you come up with these things?
The needs of the occupant or the contraption? So interesting. I think they don't well, in the worlds that I build, they almost don't exist one without the other. The machine becomes human or activated because of the body, and the body is able to transcend because of the machine.
And we've known each other for several years, and you mentioned before that we commissioned you to do a project, which was, we invited, I think, 7 or 8 designers to respond to the idea of how will mobility work in the future, and yours was by far the most out there one. Remind us what you did.
I managed to convince you and the team that the future of mobility is about how the body will travel in space, and if the body is going to be more permanently traveling in space, how does our human physiology and biology withstand permanence in space when we are not designed to exist beyond Earth's edge? So I created 2 installations. One was a performance piece. One was for audiences where you would lay down underneath a thin layer of sheeting, mylar, and a vacuum would attach to your body, and the air would be completely sucked around your body at an even rate. And we had never tested this on humans, so it was very much audiences were guinea pigs, were the kind of vulnerable test dummies for this experiment. And I don't know if you remember, but there were queues of people lining up, you know, coming back saying, first of all, it got rid of my hangover, which was, you know, one of the best calls for design festivals, but that it put my body back into place. It was like a relaxing nightmare. And I think that, you know, it's something that human contact can't give you. And when you experience something that you haven't before, and there are cultures that experiment in this world, it's alien. And I think my kind of leaning towards the anomaly or the unusual or the absurd is also part of wanting to make sensations that could feel alien. And
basically you were vacuum packing human beings, weren't you, at that show? Yeah. But there was a serious point to it. You had done your research. I think you'd spoken to doctors at NASA or something like that, because they really have an issue. If people are going to travel for 2 years in space, then the physical and the emotional needs of the human body will need a lot of science. And
I spoke with Dr. Lynn Harper, who is one of the NASA emerging space engineers. And she talked about how the body behaves as if it does underwater when we're in space. And so she's part of the team who are sending small vertebrates, fish, frogs, mice up into space to understand how we will procreate, because we don't know. But if, you know, Elon Musk's mission is to create the kind of Ryanair to Mars, then the evolution and the adaptation that the body is going to have to go through to begin to be able to exist in those kinds of environments is they're huge stepping stones.
You've prepared a little presentation about your work to show us, and then after that you're going to show us a project. We have billed it as a performance, but you're calling it an awkward show and tell, so that will come later. But for now, just if you could share your screen with us and talk us through your work.
Yeah. Okay. So this is the studio. I thought I'd put this in there because this was actually a shoot that we did 2 days before coronavirus hit. And so I think it was the next day we were kind of out of everyone was at home kind of wondering what the hell is happening next. And I started working from home, and the way that I work is working by things that are close around me, or piggybacking existing technologies like vacuum cleaners or kids fans for floating castles. This is a project that is opening in August called Biometric Mirror. It's a project that looks at the ethics of artificial intelligence, and it's going to be opening at Next Museum, which is Netherlands' first dedicated multimedia museum. And so, and then the Solitary Survival Raft is the other work that has been taking all the space up in my living room. This project has been commissioned by Heck and Moo and opens the same week as the Biometric Mirror. And this project is a continuation on from the Astronaut Aerobics Institute, which was the first project that you commissioned, and also the Compression Cradle, which was exhibited at Milan for Broken Nature. So it's the way that I work is very hands-on, and the living room gets messy, and then I move into the bathroom. This is a costume that we're currently making for Biometric Mirror. And it's not dissimilar to how I used to work when I was a kid studying high school in art. My mum would constantly say, you just keep moving around the house, taking up each room making. This was the first inception of vacuum second skins with you and Minnie at London Design Fair. This was called Astronaut Aerobics Institute. So this membrane would inflate and deflate around the body, and you became a member of this institute. So you received a certificate, a stamp, and sort of you became a character of this world. The project was then, I've sort of shown some behind the scenes. We then were asked to exhibit 2 years later in Los Angeles the same work. And this is behind the scenes working with my fabricators in LA, Machine Histories, super talented, risk-taking, genius people. And what happened in LA in 2018, on the last day, we were exhibiting at a technology conference, and a client, as I called them, laid down. So it was something similar to this situation, would lay down in the bed, and we would start this 360-degree hug. And as he lay there, he kind of looked at me sincerely and said, "This feels like an embrace," of which, yes, he was correct. And then asked if he could disclose something to him, which of course leaned in and said yes. And he said that he suffered haptophobia, which is a fear of touch. And yet he knew what an embrace was, and I was led to believe that he was having no physical contact. So he was really kind of emotionally moved. I gave him 9 minutes, And when he got up out of the bed, he hugged me. And so it was from that moment on that I really started looking at whether this machine was able to trigger the release of oxytocin, which is what happens when you hug someone or when you have sex. This is the compression cradle, which was commissioned by Hetnoy Institute and MASS in Australia for the broken nature. And so this was available for audiences to get in and out. You obviously didn't have to put your head underneath. This is how it was exhibited at the space. And we also did performances around that. And again, each time, you know, there may be a doctor in the audience who gives you feedback as to, this lady said to me, it is true, you are releasing oxytocin when you are under this membrane. If you feel comfortable, if you feel in a certain type of headspace, you will release it. But if you don't feel, if you are experiencing fear or discomfort, you won't express oxytocin. So it was always just, you know, an opportunity for us to learn more and kind of experiment. Earlier this year, I think it was, or last year, we then started looking at more manual versions for creating compression around the body. So this was a commission by Adobe and also Design Museum Holland for the exhibition State of Extremes. So we were experimenting with different kinds of membranes and how this could be not electronic, but more of a push button. And then the Solitary Survival Raft, which is the project that I will awkwardly show you at the end, is exhibiting the same week as Next at HEC in Basel. And again, it looks at that sort of technology and closeness around the body. And I think we'll probably talk more about the pandemic and the relationship the work has with the pandemic. But I think that the biometric mirror and the the Solitary Survival Raft have these kinds of tensions and contractions and expansions, which has been my experience of living through a pandemic. I think that's all I've got. Marcus, how's that?
Great. So if you could just unshare your screen then, so we can see you again.
Yeah.
So as you just said, I'm sure we'll talk about your experience of living through a pandemic. So how has it been for you, and how has it affected you personally, and how has it affected your work? And I suppose there is no dividing line between those two things.
Yeah, no, there isn't. There's no on-off switch. I think when it first happened, I was just like everyone, so shocked. And in 2019, I brought out this speculative book, Rise of Touch Crisis. So this was December 2019. And then suddenly March, I think it was, I don't know, March 12th, when we went into lockdown in LA, I was genuinely concerned because the work that I had been doing for the last 6 years was all about isolation and touch in the future, in the near future. And then suddenly it was a reality. And so I think, you know, one of the best ways of putting it is probably having an identity crisis of what am I going to make now that this is no longer a speculation, it's actually real life. So I think, yeah, it was sort of emotional and chaotic. And I think I like the quote that Mother Nature sent us all back to our rooms to have a think about what we had done. And I think that it's been a really great opportunity to go inwards and unpack the stuff that goes on in here.
So in other words, you were surprised that the future, the far-fetched future you thought you were discussing in your work was suddenly right in front of you, it was here, and you were in it.
Yeah, and I didn't have anything to say. I had nothing to say. I was shocked and I shut the door, which surprised me because when I made the Institute of Isolation movie for 3 months, I lived in isolation. I moved out of London. I woke up at 5 a.m. I didn't speak to anyone until 1 p.m. I read a book for that entire time. And that was like a constant timetable for me for 3 months. And it was super productive. It was, you know, a very different way of working. And so when this pandemic happened, I sort of like, we moved everything out of the studio, rolled up my sleeves, and I was like, this is going to be a piece of cake. I am so used to being in isolation. And I wasn't at all. I was totally unprepared. But I think that this is, you know, it makes me think about human resilience, and it's a really great time to like become more resilient.
And what is it about the fascination of an individual person? Because as soon as you've got two people, then a lot of the psychological pressures evaporate, because there's two people. Why always one person in the spaceship or one person in the survival raft? Give them a cellmate.
Yeah, I know. Maybe that's psychologically says something about me. Go to your room and think about it. I think it's about, you know, people have their own sort of speculations at the moment. It's the perfect storm. Everyone's been inside. Everyone's ready to act. Let's like change and create lasting change. And then other people say that this is a moment or a battle of our minds. And if we can sort of, if every individual can kind of defrag and sort of get to a place that is somewhat central in themselves and then unite, then perhaps that power is more expansive, because the individual self is sort of, you know, that. And then in terms of the work, I guess I see myself as a test dummy, and often than not, it's easier to test on me because I'm there. And in the movie, it was we were traveling around in the Institute of Isolation. So I think that I'm not sure if that answers your question.
And why did you move to LA? Was it to be closer to Elon Musk and NASA and all of that tech infrastructure, or was it because of its kind of cinema industry? Are you sort of working with film script writers and things like that? What was the LA move all about, and how has that been for you?
Yeah, I'm kind of operating at my optimum when I'm in an unfamiliar environment, and LA it's expansive, it's unfamiliar to me, it's quite alien. You cross Hollywood with biotech, with prosthetics, with architecture. But I had been traveling here for 4 or 5 years prior, but I was offered a job at SciArc, the architecture school in downtown. And so that was the sort of the first step and reason for me arriving here, but also my interest in television and making film. And so now that we've been here for 18 months, we're starting to expand, talking to writers, talking to production companies, and teaching at SciArc, which is a real highlight and very, very interesting during the pandemic, the questions that are coming out from students at this moment in time.
So which course are you teaching on at SciArc?
I'm a visiting professor, so I run a 15-week studio, which is, it's a very much captaining uncertainty. We make films, so often the students have never made films before. We build a timeline, slice through a timeline and start building out characters and props. I've run studios before called Liar Liar, which was based on a technology called optogenetics, developed by MIT's Ed Boyden, which in very simple terms is the concept of, the technology that you can beam electricity or light to the brain and trigger pleasure, erase memory, and essentially lie to the brain, refashion major chunks of our senses. And so if we can do that on a neurobiological level, what does that mean to architecture spatially, and what does that mean to the role of architects? So if we can lie to the brain through technology, what do we tell? And I think virtual reality, augmented reality are teetering on those edges of being able to lie. And so we speculate 5, 10, 20 years into the future, what may those scenarios look like.
And when you're talking about technology lying to the brain, are you able to look at that objectively and think, that's interesting, or are you absolutely terrified about the way that human society is going to pan out in the future?
I'm genuinely optimistic. I think that progress, we give ourselves the best chance if we are optimistic. We would take the research, the technology, and kind of look at it upside down, flip it all around. So try and look at it from every kind of angle, and depending upon some of the students were looking at the future of spirituality, the future of death, the body being its own ecology. So it was really where they landed, whether it was dystopic, utopic, and then from there the stories would unfold.
And of course, your fellow Australian Liam Young is also teaching it at SCIARC.
He's one of the reasons that I'm in LA.
You're one of those kind of people who just, every time he says something, you're just like, wow. So you're creating a little community of expatriate kind of future gazers, are you, over there?
Yeah, he just lives around the corner, actually. So we're close by. Liam and I are close by. My lights have gone up.
Okay, so moving on to the Solitary Survival Raft. You've got the raft there in the room with you.
Yes.
And you're going to give us a little, not really a performance, but a little glimpse into how that works. So just tell us again, what is the Solitary Survival Raft? Physically, what is it? And what is the kind of the objective of it as a piece of art?
Yeah. So it is made from a vacuum cleaner, a kid's blow-up castle fan, and 2 electronic gates that open and close by a switch. So that is the technology, and an entire textile membrane. The idea is, again, looking at the future of touch, emotion. Touch is a phenomenon and sense that is first developed in the womb, and yet it's sort of quite intangible and mysterious sense. So this work is looking at emotion, touch through machine, but also because of the pandemic, this concept of like courage and exploration and really being on that precipice of the unknown, because we are all kind of mini studios asking the question, what is the future now more than ever? So the process of this, the way that the work has been made is as much about the concept as it is the machine.
And so in a narrative sense, this in terms of telling a story, this is something that somebody would get in, not to escape from reality, and not merely to survive, but in the hope that they would wash up somewhere where they could start anew, or where there could be some kind of rebirth of them as a person or of society. Is that have I got it right?
Well, I think that it is not to create a solution. If that's your interpretation, I love that washed up on the beach interpretation. It's more like the work is a protagonist to suggest many different scenarios. Whether it's you wake up in the morning and you spend 8 minutes in this at home as like a domestic device to sort of give yourself the intimacy that we're not getting, or is it that there was another work, the Future Survival Kit, where there's this post-apocalyptic Sherpa carrying everything on her back, and part of one of the devices on her back was a machine that hugs you, this kind of intimacy. So I think that these concepts were born from my interest in genetic engineering, CRISPR technology, where we are able to cut, delete, and replace DNA, whether it's faulty or whether it's not faulty. And so essentially, you can design the body from scratch. You could remove traits and replace traits. And so, and to another extent, that no longer are we being birthed through the vaginal of the woman, cavity of the woman, but we could be born in Petri dishes. So what does that mean to the relationship of, you know, touch, hugging, and the baby? And so if we are born in a Petri dish, but we have these kind of residual hardwired senses of touch from our ancestry of when people were organically born, then do we need these types of devices to conserve or remind us or bring us back to those origins of touch?
And in order to demonstrate the personal solitary survival raft, you need to get into your costume. So we're going to have a bit of a stars in their eyes moment now. You've got something to show us whilst you're getting changed, right?
I'll show a little movie and let's hope it gives me enough time.
Perfect timing. So Lucy,
Yeah.
we should say goodbye now so you can go on and into your raft. Great to speak to you. By the way, what was the film we were watching? If you could explain what that was.
That was called Make Your Maker. And the brief was looking at food and the body being inseparable and what happens when genetic engineering, CRISPR technology becomes domesticated and that we can clone ourselves in our own homes, kitchens, eat ourselves in order to enhance our senses.
Amazing.
That was 2013. It's not so absurd now.
So it's been great to speak to you. And this was very much your idea. You wanted to do this. So thanks very much for getting in touch and seeing it through. and hope to see you in the real world before too long, somewhere in the world.
That would be great. Thanks, Marcus.
Okay, so let's see how the raft works.
Yeah. Okay, so let's see.